Good evening. Welcome to the University of North Carolina. My name is John Bamford. I'll introduce myself a little bit more later for those of you that don't know me, but I have the great pleasure of welcoming to the stage Penny Gordon-Larson, who is the Vice Chancellor of Research here at North Carolina, and she has kindly agreed to introduce the panel here tonight. So Penny.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody. It's great to see you here, and I was delighted to be invited because I am so excited about this panel, and it is just a fantastic opportunity to hear about the exciting work that's happening here. So I'm grateful to John Bamforth, to Aaron Gard, Elisa Watson-Mebin from the UNC School of Law in conjunction with Eshelman Innovation at the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy for organizing this wonderful event with this esteemed panel. And thank you to the sponsor of this event, Alexandria Real Estate. And Alexandria pioneered life science real estate with a mission to create and grow life science ecosystems and clusters that advance human health by curing disease and improving nutrition. And these collaborative mega campus ecosystems are in key innovation clusters, including North Carolina's RTP, and they offer laboratory and office space with operational support. So I'm delighted to introduce the panelists. We have Patrick Janssen, who is Executive Vice President of Eli Lilly and Company, President of Lilly Cardiometabolic Health, and President of Lilly USA. And originally from Sweden, Patrick has been with Lilly since 1990, so welcome. Susan Mahoney is a pharmaceutical and life sciences executive with 3 decades of experience leading global organizations. Before retiring in 2018, she was president of Lilly Oncology. So welcome. And Larry Robbins is a founding partner of the law firm Warwick Robbins, and among other things, he represents entrepreneurs beginning with early startups and continuing through the initial public offering stage. And Larry is a triple Tar Heel, so welcome. And Kathleen Sebelius served in President Obama's cabinet as the 21st Health and Human Services Secretary. She was also the governor of Kansas for 2 terms, and she's the second woman to hold that office. And before that, she served 2 terms as Kansas Insurance Commissioner. And she chairs the board of a Research Triangle biotech company, Humacyte, and serves on several other boards of directors. So welcome. And Ned Sharpless is a professor of cancer policy and innovation at the UNC School of Medicine, and he is co-founder of Jupiter BioVentures, and formerly Ned served as director of the National Cancer Institute and was also acting commissioner of the FDA. He serves on several boards, including G1 Therapeutics, which he co-founded. So thank you, and I'll turn the floor back over to John.
Thanks, Penny. And Kieran's going to come and whisk this table away. Thanks, Kieran. So we're going to do a little introductions for us to the 2 of us. So Aaron, this is your gig, dude.
Yeah.
So let's have an introduction to Aaron Gard.
It's our gig. So thank you all for coming. My name's Aaron Gard. Thank you very much, Penny. We appreciate the introduction. My name's Aaron Gard. I'm the executive director of the Institute for Innovation at the School of Law. I'd really like to thank John Bamforth and his team at Eshelman Innovation for partnering on this. This is something I've wanted to do with John since first meeting him, since he moved down here. He's become a good friend, and he's played a huge role in putting this amazing group of panelists together. I'd like to offer an extra special thanks to Elisa, Melissa, and Logan Ward, who worked very hard behind the scenes to put this whole thing together. And thanks to Firehorse Films for handling everything on the technical side. So I'll be very brief so we can get on with the show, but I do want to point out 2 things to start. First, what is the Institute for Innovation at the School of Law? And then second, why are we here collaborating with pharmacy and Eshelman Innovation? So first of all, what is the Institute? It's made up of 3 clinics. It's our startup clinic, our nonprofit clinic, and our intellectual property clinic. Each clinic is run by one of our amazing faculty. We have 2 of them here sitting in the front row. They're amazing attorneys and great faculty members. And each semester they have up to 8 students that they teach. And essentially their clinics operate as a law firm, and they provide free legal counsel for clients who really need help. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. They do amazing work, and we're very proud of them. Why are we here discussing the future of biopharma innovation? Fortunately for the law school, lawyers have a seat at pretty much every table. So it's incumbent upon us to collaborate with schools and units across campus to discuss relevant and impactful topics. So today it's pharmacy. Last semester, we had a great discussion on the future of college athletics and the wide range of legal issues that college athletics is facing. More popped up today. And it is March Madness, so I hope you guys appreciate the shoes. Perhaps next we'll partner with the School of Public Health, perhaps the School of Journalism and Media, or the Business School. The point is, for the law school and our institute, to tie ourselves to current and impactful work, because that's where our lawyers like Larry are practicing, and that's where our students have the best opportunity to learn. We are very focused on experiential and practical learning for our students. It's something that when I was in law school I really didn't get, and so the fact that we're able to provide that type of training now is really amazing. And when we're able to gather a group like this today, it's crucial that we drive home the message that for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to be a truly great public university, it's important for the law school for us to have a vibrant and thriving law school. That's a critical piece of the puzzle, so I have to make sure we get that point across. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Just before we start, to give you my background, John Bamforth, I'm the Executive Director of Eshelman Innovation at the School of Pharmacy. For those of you who don't know, #1 school of pharmacy in the country, which we're very proud of. And we're a translational institute, taking therapeutics and novel digital health companies and getting them off campus and into real companies. So that's us. I am delighted to have this esteemed group, many of which I know extremely well, especially my wife, who has taken on board her full Irish roots, as you can see today. She was watching, St. Patrick's Day. We saw Rory win today, and now Sue's wearing green. So it is Patrick's Day. And, my history is about 30 years at Lilly, and so you'll see a heavy Lilly bias today, which we won't really apologize for. It's a great thing. And then I've been here at Carolina for the last 6 years or so. So BioPharma. BioPharma in this part of the woods is super important to the region, to the state, and frankly to the institutions that make up, in particular, the Triangle. And so the future of innovation within biopharma could not be more important than to this state. And so to have this discussion today I think is timely. There's a lot going on, as we all know. And I couldn't think of a better group of people to comment on the state of play. And I want to start on Patrick's Day by asking a question to Patrick, who, again, I've known for many, many years. I was trying to work it out, Patrick. I think it's probably about 30 years that we've known each other, something in that sort of order. But let me start with a question that I think is extremely topical. So back in December, the New York Times ran an op-ed from Andrew Whitty, who we know from his GSK days and most recently at United Health as Group CEO. And he talked about the health system here in the United States being flawed, that nobody would have designed it the way that it's set up. And it's a patchwork of systems being put together in a way that really isn't built necessarily for success. I know at Lilly you've been trying to do some different things, in particular with Lilly Direct. Can you talk a little bit about that example and how you think in this flawed system, processes like that and programs like that might help?
Well, thank you very much, John, and thanks a lot for inviting me and being a part of this event with a very distinguished audience as well as panel members up here. Particularly fun to be together with Sue in a panel again, so it's super nice to be here. Unfortunately, I think Andrew Whitty was right. No one has tried to replicate the US healthcare system, and not very often when I'm at major consumer events, I'm asking, okay, can you raise your hand if you have just had a stellar consumer experience in the US healthcare system? And I think normally I can count those hands being raised. And that's why we, back in 2023, started to ask ourselves, okay, is there anything that we can do as a pharmaceutical company to remove the frictions for patients? And that's when the idea to Lilly Direct came up. And Lilly Direct, it's probably the first integrated healthcare platform launched by a pharmaceutical company. So that's an opportunity for a patient to find disease information. They can connect with an independent healthcare provider in office or telehealth. And if a doctor would decide to prescribe a Lilly medicine, they can even get it directly from our third-party pharmacy, shipped to the comfort of their house within 48 hours. And we did this mainly just to try to see, is there anything we can do? And we started in a small scale within migraine and diabetes. Today, 2 years later, we can see that we have every day close to 3,500 new patients signing up for an experience with Lilly Direct. And we measure the customer satisfaction here. And more than 90% of those that are interacting with us on a daily basis are saying that this was an excellent experience. So we are by no means done. There is so much more we can do, and we can broaden this to more disease areas than we currently are in. But I think as long as there is a huge unmet need, and I think experiences normally are quite poor in the healthcare system, I think you will see much more innovation, maybe along the lines of what we are doing at Lilly, but there is so much more that can be done, and we need a lot of innovation in this space.
So, Larry, this one's for you. As the attorney on the panel, so healthcare liability and regulations shape this whole framework. So what legal reforms or innovations might help fix the system?
Yikes. Well, I think that in response to sort of the general question to begin with, that there is a patchwork quilt of ways of addressing the healthcare markets. The liability section of the equation is a patchwork quilt as well. There are 50 different states that have 50 different sets of laws relating to claims that can be made in connection with malpractice. Some states have capped non-economic losses. Some states have capped economic losses. All of those dollars that are expended in connection with medical malpractice premiums flow back through the system in terms of cost. And we all know how expensive the delivery of medical health care is these days. But to the extent that we could come together with patient safety in mind and build a framework around the liability section, I think we'd be better off. And in many cases, when you go into a physician's office these days, after you spend 30 minutes filling out the forms to comply with HIPAA and everything else that they're required to comply with, you don't really know whether this is treatment that I'm going to get that's trying to avoid a malpractice claim, or do I really need it? And that uncertainty all folds into the cost of healthcare that we're all having to deal with. So a unified system at the federal level perhaps would make that more sensible.
Thanks, Larry. Kathleen, so the FDA recently approved the first lab-grown blood vessel developed by Humacyte here in the Triangle. You chair that board, and that's where we met, which has been fantastic. But you, in your time at HHS, which houses FDA, what are the key regulatory challenges that you see around innovative therapies like the product produced by Humacyte? And how can the industry work with the regulators to improve the approval process for those types of innovative medicines?
Well, I want to start with where Patrick started, thanking both of you for organizing this discussion. And it's a delight to be on the panel and to see this great audience. Rare territory for me in the beginning of March Madness to be in North Carolina territory, but Kansas and North Carolina both have teams that suck this year. So let's just, we're here as friends and allies, once again, but delighted to be here. What Humicide is a great example of just an incredible breakthrough technology that took a very long time to get to. A brilliant scientist, founder, now CEO, who developed a material that is a biologic material that takes on somebody's cellular makeup once it's inserted in your body, and it's got the first designation from the FDA as a regenerative medicine product. That's great. The problem is it was the first time that FDA had dealt with a regenerative medicine product. And it has taken an extraordinarily long period of time because I think, the science breakthrough was ahead of the regulatory framework. It didn't have an appropriate division to go to. People couldn't figure out if we were a device or a drug. Was it a biologic? The old rules did not apply neatly. The expertise within the regulatory agency, and that's a fault of really no one's, except I think it's going to be more and more typical as science breakthroughs occur. The regulators, I think, are going to need different kinds of very fast, up to speed ways to deal with that. It's very hard to do a clinical trial with a comparison because there aren't any, appropriately sized or shaped comparisons. We're now dealing with a trauma application, and the real comparison is, can you avoid secondary infections and amputations? Well, you don't want to have a placebo group to just go through an amputation so every step of the process became, I think, very, very complicated. And because it's a brand new product, not only was the material invented and then grown, but the manufacturing system was designed from scratch. That all exists right here in Raleigh. It's really quite a remarkable company. But again, to look at manufacturing standards, which the FDA appropriately looks at, in a brand new manufacturing system that had never been together before. What was it that they were measuring? What does the team look at? So it was just an example, I think, of 10 to 12 years of science in a lab and then the product coming to market, but dealing with the rub of the science being ahead of the agency at every step and having to have very intense discussions about, are you sure that you're using, the right measurement, the right lens? Do you have the right people on here? How do you get up to speed, sending reams of materials? And I think that it's just an example, I think, of the folks at the FDA. Don't get me wrong, I was thrilled to work with some of the most brilliant people I've ever known. But also they were, schooled and educated on science that was in front of them. And this is going to be brand new. And you're talking about breakthrough technologies. I think we need some breakthrough regulators who can, maybe redesign their process very quickly and get up to speed.
Thanks, Kathleen. Ned, just jumping to you because you obviously served as acting FDA commissioner. In a related way, if you think about the budget cuts that are inevitably coming through the new administration, how do you think that will affect the regulatory process for innovative therapies like Kathleen describes?
Yeah, by the way, thank you guys for hosting this and having us, as everyone has said. When I was at FDA, literally my primary worry was sort of staffing. The headcount was going down, and there were very specific types of expertise that the FDA needs to regulate these products. Think about something like artificial intelligence. The Device Center is bombarded with products that now, have very, complex machine learning capabilities, and the reviewers of the FDA have to have that expertise. Similarly, there's technological innovations in food. The Food Center has to keep up. Transgenic animals was one of the biggest innovative products when I was at FDA and remains so today. So, which can be medical products or food, right? So a very complicated regulatory product. So I was constantly worried about how to bring in the right people that had the expertise that will allow the FDA to to function in this brave new world where, products such as the Humacyte product are coming for the first time ever. And I agree very much with what Secretary Sebelius said, that this is not going to stop, right? This problem's going to get worse and worse because technology is so cool. I mean, we're seeing such awesome innovation on the science side, but those products then have to get regulated in some way. So I think that, there's a long-standing problem at the FDA with having the right expertise and having the right the right people to solve these problems, and then have the right policy framework from Congress, the right law in place to take on some of these issues. So that's sort of the existing status quo at the FDA. The point is, it's never like in great shape from that point of view because this area changes so dynamically. And now, superimposed upon that, we have this need from the present administration for a reduction in funding to agencies throughout government, and I think that's understandable why that is. The U.S. is in debt and needs to cut spending in some ways. And there's no doubt that this administration has made that a top priority, and they've been very clear about that, and they won the election, so that's going to happen. So I can tell you, if you've ever cut a big budget in an organization, the worst way to do it is say everybody gets 5% off or something. That's a really horrible idea, and that would be particularly horrible at the FDA. So I think it's incumbent upon the people who care about government to stand up and argue for why the thing they think is most important is truly most important, because there's going to be this tremendous competition for funding across the federal government, as we'll see. And so I've made the argument that, of course, the Trump administration is right to pursue cuts in spending, just not like the NIH, or just not 10% of the device center as the initial personnel layoffs there, which most of those individuals, almost all of them, were hired back, by the way. But I think that cuts are going to happen, and it's up to us who care about these things to try and make sure they don't occur in the parts of government that are most essential, that are a great use of federal funds, like the NIH and the FDA.
Thank you, sir. Sue, how do you put up with this guy over here?
I do not think we've got enough time to talk about.
I've got another. I had a backup question. So how do you see artificial intelligence and machine learning transforming drug discovery and biomedical research?
Okay, well, first, it is great to be here and to see so many people that I know in the audience. I know a lot of people in Chapel Hill, I realized today. Firstly, I think AI is going to transform everything we do in the broader base. But if you look at biomedical research and drug discovery, I'm involved on the board of a number of companies that are sort of trying AI, sort of testing it out. It's pretty new to them, but they're using it really at the moment in a lot of sort of administrative areas, how to write grants, assuming that it's worth writing grants these days. How to do research to look at, collate and summarize data and publications and all that kind of stuff. And what we're seeing, though, if you read the industry daily news that comes out, is pretty much every week there is a new partnership or collaboration that's happening with big pharma and AI, and with small biotechs and AI. And AI is being used in drug discovery across the whole of the drug discovery process. Whether it's in identifying novel targets or speeding target selection, protein engineering, in the whole preclinical space from how do you improve and speed up the preclinical research. So it's kind of being used across the whole space. And I think we're going to see a lot come out of that. Which I think will be interesting. What I'm most interested in, though, is there are a number of AI companies now who started out as tech AI companies, and now they've transitioned to fully integrated biotech companies. So AI-driven, fully integrated biotech companies. And I think we're going to learn a lot from these companies. They're already saying that they can significantly reduce the time it takes to bring a product from candidate selection through to clinical trial. And they're stating that they can half the time. So if you can half the discovery time in R&D, if that's replicated, that will have a significant impact on the time and the cost to discover and develop drugs. The other thing that they're saying is, instead of the normal biotech processes, you will have like one product you're bringing through to IND, and the biotech company is sort of, well, the make or break is whether that product has trial data or preclinical data that's good. They're bringing multiple products through. One of them is stating they've got 10 products ready for IND. Now, obviously, they're also going to have to streamline the clinical process, but they're working on that too. So I think at a minimum, we're going to see AI streamlining, reducing time, reducing cost of R&D. Now, the Holy Grail is, can they actually make these products more successful in the clinic? Can they reduce the dropout rate? I mean, 90% of drugs don't make it through. So if AI can actually improve the success rate, then you truly are transforming the industry. And I think that's yet to be seen, but I think we're going to see it over the next few years as more and more people use AI. And I think, the other side of it is we got to be, so I think there's a lot of positives. I think there's some things we need to be concerned about. I mean, we're all concerned about what it means for jobs. I mean, one of the companies states that they have an AI humanized, fully robotic wet lab. What does that tell you? So, will that take off? If it does, clearly that has impacts for jobs. The other side, though, that I worry about is the amount of data that some companies will have, the amount of information. Biomedical research is reliant on publications. It's reliant on sharing research, sharing learning, so you can build on that. If from an AI perspective, you've got tech companies, AI companies, big pharma companies, whatever, who have a huge amount of data, that there's sort of a disproportionate amount of data in certain companies or, whatever. I think that could make a difference. And so as we're looking at, I mean, people are talking about open AI, whether they should regulate AI, et cetera. I think we really need to be careful on that from a biomedical perspective and make sure that we continue to have open access to research so that, we could all benefit from research that comes through.
Thank you. Ned, same question for you. How's AI changing the biopharma space?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things Sue said, we use it a lot in drug discovery. We will use it to design molecules or identify targets. But I think it's important to say, kind of where it is and where it could be. Right now it's sort of it's a useful tool. I like to tell people it's like Excel. You could do what you needed to do without Excel, but it certainly makes doing it easier, right? So AI drug discovery, if you're doing a target where there's a lot of prior, attempts to drug that target and there's a lot of prior art in the literature to look at, it's better. But if you do it, for a completely novel thing that no one's ever tried to drug before, it doesn't really work that well. So we were 0 for 300 compounds we synthesized against a novel target, for example. I think, and certainly in the image recognition space, in terms of radiologic tools, reading your echogram, things like that, that is here and now. If you get a mammogram in the United States, an AI is going to help interpret that result now. And same with CAT scans of the chest, these kinds of things. So in terms, some products it's right now ready to go. Other things it's a bit aspirational and shortly in the future. I can tell you, about a year and a half ago, a bipartisan group of senators asked me to chair a session on sort of the opportunities of AI for cancer research. And we had this nice panel. Someone from Google came, someone from Tempus came, a few of the companies in this space. And it was clear that there was an interest, a congressional interest in legislature in this area, what we needed to do to protect patients' data, but also to not lose innovation to our competitors, competitor countries. And I can tell you, and I think the reason they wanted AI in cancer is because they'd had prior panels that before that one that didn't go so well, where there was this sense that AI is very creepy and it's going to, we might build Skynet by accident, these kinds of things. And so, so AI in cancer was supposed to be like the good story of how, we're going to, make better molecules and, read our, CAT scans better and these kinds of things. But even our panel, quickly you bump up against some problems because there's this, worry that, these tools have a potential for harm, particularly if they allocate patients to therapy. Will they create biases that certain patients will be treated differently? There's a famous paper about, this decision to discharge patients, and the AIs started to use things like race to classify patients, and that's creepy, and nobody wants that. So, I think there is a sense of great potential, but also how to make sure these products are safe and useful. Maybe the last point I will say about this is, in just about every hospital in the country now, they're starting to use these AI, these so-called clinical decision support tools, where the AI, ingests all your data from Epic or whatever EHR you use, and it says, oh, this patient in the ICU, the AI spits out, this person's likely to become septic in the next, 12 hours. So, you physicians should probably come and do something about that. And, nobody knows how these things work. They're black box. They're not explainable AI. And the FDA has now decided those things are probably medical devices, right? That we should not use them in an unregulated way. So even like when something becomes of interest to the federal government is an unclear, concept at the moment. And so it's fascinating, but also a little frightening to see what's going to happen in the future.
So Kathleen, just building off that, if you were back at the agency or back at HHS, and you were presented with these regulatory challenges around real-world data, around big data, how should the agencies be thinking about managing those challenges?
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert in any way, shape, or form around either the medical discoveries or artificial intelligence. Excuse me. And I think both Ned and Sue have outlined some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. I think a line that in the world of medical care seems fairly clear is if you're dealing in services, the back office physician practices where there are 8 people doing billings and things and, to one clinician, AI could make a real difference there in lowering that administrative cost and cutting through some of that, translating some of the electronic records with physician support, on and on. I think in the scientific area, there's a real opportunity. One of the exciting things, and I think hopefully it was still going when Ned was also at the FDA, was actually getting companies like Eli Lilly to put their patents back on the table, if you will, for sort of group analysis. Patents that had made it through phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, but for one reason or another, the company no longer had a women's health division, or they were moving in a different direction, putting those back on the table and saying, if anybody wants to take them on for unmet needs, we're putting them in the public space. And there were some drugs that fit a niche market and not the entire population that they were aimed for. AI could help sort through those very quickly and look at, links between where are the unmet needs and what actually is out there that's already been de-risked to a certain extent and could be accelerated into the marketplace. So I think AI can play an enormously important role. I do think there are, certainly privacy issues and data issues and patient harm potential when it involves AI making a diagnosis that isn't backed up by a live human being. And where exactly that falls in the clinical decision-making is going to be very hard to regulate, but I think there's a lot of apprehension around AI being your healthcare provider, not helping your healthcare provider. And so I think there's a lot to be, regulated in the future that hopefully people will move fairly cautiously, not stop the innovation, but look at a real patient harm, patient connection area as the first place to go.
Thanks. Patrick, wanted to pivot to manufacturing, if that's okay. We're blessed here in North Carolina to have a very large footprint of biomanufacturing facilities, including the Lilly facility in Durham now and one to come online down by Charlotte pretty soon. How can the industry address some of the challenges with biologics manufacturing? These novel therapies now are becoming increasingly complex. How does the industry think about that type of complexity and navigating through that?
Well, one response is building more sites in North Carolina.
Good. That's a good thing.
I think you're asking this question based upon some of the supply constraints that we experienced last year, and I think everyone read about the difficulties at times to find GLP-1s or dual agonists like ours, GLP-1s, GIPs. And also maybe the biosecure discussion that actually was initiated back in 2024. For us at Lilly, I think first and foremost, we are blessed with a wonderful and amazing manufacturing team that are really working 24/7. So I think we are today in a much better situation than we were in 2024, and we have publicly declared that we will supply at least 1.6 times what we supplied the first half of 24 in 25. We are no longer on the FDA shortage list, and I think we are in a much better position for patients as well, because we saw a mass compounding of incretins last year, which wasn't going through regulatory approval for safety or quality or for clinical efficacy, and we know that quite a few US citizens were actually significantly exposed. What we have done is that just since 2020, we have been investing $23 billion in manufacturing, and a huge majority of that in the US, and a big part here in North Carolina. Just in Concord, we have been investing more than $2 billion, and at RTP, more than 1.7. And just a couple of weeks ago, we made another announcement that over the coming 5 years, we intend to invest at least another $27 billion in manufacturing here in the US. And that's going to be 3 sites for active pharmaceutical ingredients. So I think that allows us to build the critical capabilities of small molecule chemical synthesis. So it's a reshoring here. And the 4th site is going to be about antibodies and parenteral compounds. So it's a huge investment in that space, and I think we will see more of that. But at the end of the day, I think if we really are talking about reaching and scaling to patients across the globe, we need to do more oral medicines, particularly when it comes to obesity. That is a global crisis today. And we expect more than 1 billion people across the globe to actually suffer from obesity. And there is no way that we can provide all of those in need with injectable medicines. So I think I'm super excited by one of the medicines we have in the pipeline, where we're reading out 9 phase 3 trials this year, which is an oral with and hopefully an injectable-like efficacy. But then we avoid the cold chain requirements, and we can meet patients in parts of the globe that we have a hard time to reach right now with injectable medicines.
Thank you, Patrick. Sue, let's touch on an area of your expertise. What are some challenges and opportunities of scaling personalized therapies in oncology, where you spent a lot of your career, and how can they be made more affordable and accessible?
So I think personalization or targeting has been ongoing for a long time now in oncology, probably 20 years or so. So there's a number of drugs that are now available to patients that, as opposed to this one-size-fits-all, you can actually have a drug that is targeting a specific tumor target for that patient. And so it avoids all the toxicity of, other drugs, etc. And the challenges are really severalfold. Partly it's really identifying those patients and getting to those patients, and it's through the whole process. So, if you have got, for example, a clinical trial in lung cancer, and the target that you're aiming for is in 2% of lung cancer patients, it's a lot harder to do a clinical trial in those patients than it is if you are looking at all lung cancer patients. So there's a complexity there, and a cost and a timing that it takes to do those kind of trials in the first place. Then, of course, when the drug is available, making sure that you've got tests and biomarker testing and genetic testing that's done, and unfortunately that's not available everywhere, and it's not necessarily funded by or reimbursed everywhere. So, where you get treated for cancer actually does matter. And so really the opportunity is to make sure that all patients can have the benefit of getting genetic testing, biomarker testing, and targeted therapies. The other thing is some of these new therapies that are in development or just being launched are pretty complex. For example, there's the CAR Ts where you're essentially taking T cells from a patient, you're manipulating them so that they can target a certain tumor, a tumor target, and then you're putting them back in the patient. I mean, the complexity around that whole distribution system is really high. And so from that perspective, it restricts the number of patients that have access to it, restricts the number of centers that can do this. At the moment, it's only focused on liquid tumors. And there's a cost. So, there's a complexity and a cost and an accessibility that are the challenges in really making personalized medicine more available to more people. And then there are so many targets still that we don't know, and that's improving. But innovation is helping with that, and I think innovation will continue to help with that as we're bringing through more drugs at, you'll know better than me on this, but these undruggable targets historically, we're bringing more drugs through now that can do this. These next generation cell therapies that are potential to have a benefit in solid tumors as well as liquid tumors, or allogeneic CAR Ts that are off the shelf as opposed to having to manipulate. So there's a technology here that I think, an innovation that will happen, that will continue to help to bring more targeted medicines to patients. But we also have a reimbursement issue that we need to continue to drive because, as I said, at the moment, not all of the genetic tests, et cetera, biomarkers are reimbursed for patients, so you can't identify the patients. And then some of these new drugs are just not getting reimbursed because they're looking at cost as opposed to a value. And the more that we can do outcomes-based and value-based pricing, I think that's going to be a better opportunity. And I think the other thing is as we continue to, as I said, bring new medicines out, we're going to have, the system, if it works properly, we'll have products going generic. So we've got a lot of targeted medicines that are going generic. That should bring more money into the system to allow more innovation, et cetera. So there's a number of things that are happening already, but I think there's a number of things and opportunities that can continue to make sure that more patients get access to these medicines universally and not just because of the center that you go to.
Thanks. Larry, shout out to Eshelman Innovation. We work at that nexus between academic research and commercialization. For decades, your firm here in the Triangle has helped scientists commercialize their technology. Can you talk about the challenges and opportunities around research translation, things that happen here on this campus?
Well, I think that we're seeing recently a huge impact that's going to have on what's going on in the university laboratories with the NIH announcements. And those dollars are so important because they provide the academics with a sort of a free rein to go out, look for novel, interesting observations in the labs that they can convert into commercial opportunities. And I think that over the past 20 years, research in the labs and translating the research into commercial opportunities has changed dramatically in terms of the support that the professors receive from the very top levels at the universities. So I'm not exactly sure what changed their perspective, but if we look back perhaps at Duke University, and Ralph Snyderman came from West Coast, high-tech firm. All of a sudden, instead of it being a dirty word to try to commercialize things and come out of the ivory tower, he was encouraging people to start companies and encouraged the tech transfer offices to work more closely with the professors to pull the technologies out of the university. Here at UNC, Holden Thorpe had an extraordinary view of the entrepreneurial world. Started 2 companies on his own, and when you have support at the top level, pushing down, indicating to people that this is not going to count against you anymore, because it did for many years count against you if you wanted to do something with your commercialization efforts. But that support was critical, I think, to getting the universities to recognize, hey, you know, if we support somebody like a Fred Eshelman who's going to write a check for X amount of dollars, I might want to pay attention to that area of the world, because I want to recruit those people, I want to retain them, I want to make sure they've got the best research people in their laboratories, because if we can get those novel observations and translate them into commercial opportunities, we're going to create entrepreneurs who are going to be able to give back to the university. And that's a very, very important, I think, top-down push that we've seen recently.
Thanks, Larry. Ned, here's a follow-up for you. So you co-founded G1 Therapeutics to commercialize drug candidates licensed from your UNC lab. How did the RTP ecosystem help you out?
Yeah, I think I thought then and I think today that RTP is a really great place to start a biotech company. It's the most important thing for an early stage company, other than the sort of scientific idea, the premise on which it's founded, is to be able to round up good people to work on that idea. And University of North Carolina, Duke, NC State, they form this region that attracts a lot of people with good ideas. So when I started G1 Therapeutics, it was around an era when GSK had laid off several hundred scientists out in the Triangle, and they were all looking for something to do. And these were people who had 10, 15, 20 years of drug discovery experience who I was able to recruit to that company. It would have had no chance of being successful without those great people who are some of them are still around in the area, starting other companies and doing entrepreneurial things. So it is this sort of virtuous cycle that if you find things for these people to do, they will be successful and continue to do things in your area. So I think the RTP has cheap space, it has good people, it has real strengths in manufacturing and chemistry, manufacturing, control, CMC. The knock against RTP has always been funding. The venture capital here is lighter. Given the number of NIH dollars, the venture capital presence is lower in RTP than say Seattle or not even comparing San Francisco and Boston, which are a different world. But I think that problem, while everyone complains about it, is probably in the modern era a little overtaught. I mean, now you can get pretty much any VC on a Zoom chat anytime you want. So I think the geographic barriers are not what they once were. So I think it is a great place to start a company, and will continue to be so for a while because of those factors.
Thanks. Kathleen, what role do public-private partnerships play in driving innovation in pharma, particularly in high-risk areas?
Well, I think they're critical, and it's one of the things that, and I think all of us have an agreement that some of the cuts that have been announced are really alarming, and they threaten the innovation economy. And the innovation economy, I think, as somebody said, it's, the government is a reliable partner with rules and money, and year in and year out, they have placed a high priority, I'd say since 1945, on science and technology. Goes up and down a bit, but I think this is the first time, I will tell you, as the former secretary of HHS, we were actually, we put together a budget in a backwards way. NIH was such a sort of golden child in Congress. Bipartisan support, left and right. We knew that at the agency level, we could put discretionary dollars into some of the smaller, less well-known agencies. HHS has 13 under an umbrella, because NIH was always going to get plussed up by people in Congress. It didn't have to happen within the department dollars. It was always going to get bumps from Republicans and Democrats who really just believed that that was one of the major things that could happen. Those NIH dollars flow to 2,500 research institutions, well, I know there's nothing like North Carolina, but similar research institutions, and 300,000 external scientists that then work on, they can take risks. The government isn't taking a lot of risks. The scientists can be risk takers and the private companies can be risk takers. If that bond is broken, I think we have really damaged. It's not just about money. It's about the ecosystem that relies on bench science being taken to a certain point. Companies then taking that bench science through very expensive clinical trials, picking the right markers, and taking it into market. And I think that having that very important partnership fractured, I don't know that there's any way that the private sector can step in and replace $48 billion of NIH money, or even $4 billion. If the cut for administrative costs goes through, that's $4 billion. But also, all kinds of probationary employees at the FDA, at the NIH have just been laid off. I was saying to somebody, you know, if you want to wholesale fire people, which is really not a very bright way to do much of anything, what you would do is take people within a year of retirement, not the youngest, brightest, most technologically savvy, most innovative folks, and just get rid of them across the board. So there's some steps in this recent process that really alarm me in terms of breaking what has been this engine in the United States for biomedical research. And it's often cited that we may be as important to biomedical research as the next 10 countries put together. That's where the United States has been and has been for a long time. And that, I think, is a precarious perch to be, because I can guarantee you China is dying to replace that number one position with people and innovation and partnerships and directives. So it's been critical. It's been a critical engine, not just in various regions in the country, but to the entire United States. And I think it's very, very dangerous to have one of the partners in that be in a very handicapped position.
I just want to take a moment to ask Jimmy to step up for a second. Jimmy Rosen is CEO of an organization called READY, based here, public-private partnership. I just wanted Jimmy to talk about his experiences running a public-private partnership and why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm Jimmy Rosen from READY, and READY was created to develop broad-spectrum small molecule antiviral drugs in advance of the next pandemic. So the drugs that we're making, these are drugs taken by mouth with a drink of water that hit every virus within a given virus family. And what many people don't realize is that there's only about 24 virus families that cause human illness. About 8 of those have the properties necessary to generate a virus that could cause a pandemic. And if we create drugs against those 8 virus families that can work against every virus in each of those families, even the virus we've never seen before, the yet to emerge virus, we can actually establish a portfolio of drugs that we can use currently on diseases that are caused by existing viruses within those families, but also have them in a stockpile and available on the shelf when the next new virus emerges. And excuse me, new virus families don't pop up out of nowhere generally. So these 8 virus families are the ones that we really worry about, and they contain things like avian flu that we're all reading about. They contain dengue, Zika virus, West Nile, Ebola, all the ones that you've heard of and have been in the news. The public-private partnership piece of this is that READY was created as a mission-focused organization. So we have a global access commitment, meaning that we're trying to create these broad-spectrum small molecule drugs because they're inexpensive, they're easy to manufacture, they can be distributed all over the world, they don't have cold chain problems. You can give a blister pack to somebody and have them take it home. They take it with a drink of water, not even a glass of water, because not everybody in the world even uses glasses. And 30% of the world's population still has yet to be vaccinated against some of the most common viral illnesses. So if we can create therapeutics that keep people out of the hospital and prevent severe illness, then you keep the economy running, you keep kids in school, and you prevent global catastrophic events. Now, public-private partnerships are necessary to do this because viral disease doesn't make the pharmaceutical industry's top 10 list of places where they can earn money. And so we need university-based research to create hit and lead compounds And then eventually you're going to need the pharmaceutical industry to manufacture and distribute and cover the last mile. But there's a huge gap in there. And so Ready was created as a public-private partnership to fill that gap, be the entity that's a biotechnology company but acting in the public interest, to take those university discoveries, take them through the preclinical work, and take them into the clinic and get that first in human data such that they're ready for phase 2 development, and then we can have an effective conversation with the pharmaceutical companies.
Thanks, Jim.
So Ned, so we're talking about public-private partnerships here. Do you see moves being made in Washington that help or hurt public-private partnerships?
So a bit of both. I mean, I think they're not easy, I think is the first thing to say. When I was at the NIH, we really had often trouble doing very logical, obvious, good partnerships that everybody believed was a good idea, and there was no sort of occult conflict of interest or something. But even so, because of the way the federal government works and the sensitivities around spending, federal dollars in certain areas, they're a challenge. I think that this has always been very frustrating to members of Congress and members of the executive branch. And so I think there is this, so ARPA-H, for example, this sort of new agency was created in part to try and get around some of that red tape so that public-private partnerships could be done more nimbly and swiftly and with reduced contracting burden and things like that. And I think that's been a mixed success to date. I think it's early to say if that's really working or not. But I'm somewhat hopeful because there is this sense in government that they need to happen. So I mentioned AI, for example. When I was at NCI, I think I spent my, the whole time there trying to recruit great people with artificial intelligence expertise to come work in the federal government, and was, I would say, largely to wholly unsuccessful because these people would take a 5-fold pay cut from Google to come work for us. But there was great interest in working with the federal government because they would come to me and they would say, the NCI has great data. I want to use your data, but I don't want to get paid like a Fed, and I don't want to follow all those dumb rules. So I want to work with you. So there was this interest of industry working with the federal government, and there was this real sense of the federal government that we needed their help. So figuring that out is a pressing concern, and I think is a cause for optimism in this area. I will just say, if I might freelance here for a moment on a point that was made. I find myself telling this story over and over again about indirects. So, there's this notion that, the Trump administration on kind of a Friday afternoon said we're going to cut indirects from, an average 26% to 15% or whatever, and everybody freaked out and lost their mind. And for those of us who are not new to this game, the same thing was, sort of voiced in Trump 1. So early in the first Trump administration, they threatened to cut indirects to 10%. And there was this delightful hearing in Congress where that idea was soundly ridiculed by several Republican senators. Okay, I'm talking about people like, Richard Burr and Lamar Alexander and Roy Blunt, the people who controlled appropriations to the NIH at that time, saying what a terrible idea that would be and how awful that would be for biomedical research in the United States if something like that happened. And I don't think if we had a hearing on this topic today, you would have Republican senators come to the rescue like that. And that was 2017 I'm talking about. So I think we should ask ourselves as academics, what happened in those intervening 8 years that made half of the members of Congress kind of lose trust in the NIH? Because as Secretary Sebelius said, it really was the golden child when I was there, and it is not any longer. And I think that is a sobering thought, and that augurs poorly for the future appropriations process for the NIH, which is why I'm so worried about this, and I keep saying, protect the NIH budget. But I think we have to think about what did we do that made, so many legislators not really believe in us anymore, and how do we get that back?
Okay, I'm going to take a pivot, and I'm actually going to open the entire panel. Anybody who'd like to take a run at this? How do you see the integration of digital health solutions such as remote monitoring and digital therapeutics changing the traditional biopharma landscape? Look at that. They're all moving to action.
Okay, I'll start, and I'll just make a comment. I mean, this thing here probably knows more about me than my doctor. These wearables, And digital health is going to be part and part, I think, of the future of biopharma going forward. Again, lots of digital companies who are partnering with other pharma companies. Pharma, biotech is looking at not just the pill now, but beyond the pill. So broader, broader healthcare. As we continue to get more wearable use and knowledge, I think these things will be used for clinical trial recruitment. In fact, one of the companies I'm involved in is a neuroscience company, and they're already using digital health in helping to not recruit patients in trials, but help monitor patients in trials. In pharma, keeping patients on medicines is a really tough thing to do, particularly if there isn't anything that you can see on a day-to-day basis. If you've got a feedback loop here, it could potentially help those things. So I think it's going to be pretty important going forward. And also from a infrastructure perspective, it's the digital health companies are going to be part and parcel of this whole biotech, pharma, academia infrastructure as we work together.
Just to pick up on that a little bit, I think the examples Sue gave are absolutely right on target. But I know pill packs that actually announce to the doctor if the pill has been taken or not. I mean, that give direct feedback. Devices put in homes. They're doing a lot of experimentation with an aging in place where the carpet on the rug is over a slot, that if the carpet begins to move, that alerts a home health aide to come in and remove it because it's a fall risk, or various kinds of what I would consider furniture or appliances that actually are digital health devices that are giving real-time feedback to healthcare providers, to community health providers, to home health people. And I think there's a potential great interaction between a pharmaceutical company and a device that actually does real-time monitoring and feedback, so that it both alerts the patient, it can alert a patient helper, it can alert the doctor, it can make sure that there is a real feedback loop that often is missing now on a regular basis, and do it outside of a clinical setting. I mean, that's the other exciting thing, that you don't have to go back into a doctor's office with a list of something that you may or may not have taken, that feedback is done real time, and the pharmaceutical folks can monitor it. The pharmacist can help fill a prescription before it's even out and alert the patient. I mean, the sort of interaction between a healthcare provider, a patient, and the pharmaceuticals, which are going to keep them out of a clinical setting, I think can be really enhanced.
I would also say, not necessarily strictly digital, but telehealth. We see the extraordinary cost of building a hospital, the consolidation of many hospital systems, the loss of the systems in the rural areas, and the use of telehealth in those areas where the less privileged don't have access to local facilities, and they get the access, and it reduces the cost of delivering healthcare to them. So I think the telehealth component of that will be important as well.
We launched a connected pen for people with type 2 diabetes a couple of years ago, and I think everything that you refer to in terms of the benefit at the patient level, adjusting the dose, understanding the level of adherence, the side effects, etc. I think it enables a much more qualitative discussion in between the provider and the patient than we have experienced before in that space. I still believe it hasn't been embraced to the extent that we expected. So I think it has a lot to do with the disease area, the device, how user-friendly it is, but also the willingness at the provider level to get started, because it's something new, and it always takes some time to overcome. But I think at the end of the day, the data that is being generated to support the patient on his or her journey is stronger than anything else we have seen in that space.
Very good answer. Thank you. Sue, when we speak of the biopharma industry, we're generally talking about developed countries. We're here at UNC, a leading public university with top health, medical, and pharmacy schools, all of which look at the world through a global lens. How do you see the evolution of biopharma in the entirety of the world?
Well, I mean, I think it is global now. And we talked about, US being dominant, and it still is. And traditionally, US and Europe were sort of where all the regulatory agencies were, where the research development happened, etc. And that's changed. And Kathleen mentioned China. I mean, the focus that China has had has been very strategic and very deliberate as they've wanted to become a powerhouse in biopharma. And they're really achieving that. I mean, WuXi AppTec has been in the news about, companies shouldn't be working with them. Well, there's a lot of biotech companies in the US who are working with WuXi. One of the companies that I'm on the board of is an oncology company, and they did some benchmarking to see for a specific drug that they were looking at, what were the last business development deals where pharma was partnering with small biotechs to in-license discovery level target drugs. And there were 30 business development deals done in the last 2 years or so. 26 of them were with Chinese companies. So, I mean, I think sometimes we underestimate how sophisticated, and these are oncology novel drugs. So I think we are underestimating how far advanced countries like China are. And then you've got South Korea, which really is a cell therapy and biologics powerhouse now. So it truly is global. And so to your point and I think that there are countries that are progressing very quickly, like China, like South Korea, like others, that are really bringing out strong innovation. And then, as we talked about previously, there's tech companies now with AI. There's the digital health companies. All of these don't have to be in our normal, North Carolina, Boston, biotech hubs. They can be anywhere. And we're seeing that. So it is becoming much more of a, global, integrated world. I still think the hubs are going to be around. And I still think the US, as long as we don't mess it up with funding, will continue to be ahead. But others are growing pretty quickly in this area, and we need to be aware of that.
Hey, Patrick, you're somewhat uniquely positioned in this global frame. You've run businesses in Scandinavia, in Italy, in Japan, and now the US. What's your view of that evolution in biopharma globally?
Well, I agree with everything that Sue said. I think health and R&D has no boundaries, and I think we rely on strong partnership globally here. We are running our clinical trials in more than 100 countries across the globe, and we are providing our medicines to people across the globe. But I think there are several nations that would love to take on the leadership position of USA. And if I remember my numbers correct here, 35 years back in time, actually more than 50% of new innovations used to come from the European region. They changed the innovation policies, and I think it's down to 30 to 35% today. So you're not just making sure that we continue to advocate for strong innovation-friendly policies, whatever that embeds is going to be key for the US to keep this leadership position. And beyond that, I think for us as well, we're actively reaching out to thought leaders, academia, smaller startups across the globe. We initiated a couple of years ago something that we call the Gateway Labs. And the Gateway Labs is just a space for small startups to get some space within a Lilly laboratory and to get access to large-scale pharma capabilities. So it also serves as an accelerator. And we started in the US. We opened up the first one outside the US this year, and we are planning for more of those sites across the globe. So I think it's an area where we need to make sure that we are working with thought leader startups across the globe, but also where we are actively advocating for maintaining strong policies and incentives in the US.
Looking at it through a slightly different lens, if you think about countries across the globe, particularly third world, how do you think about balancing profitability with social responsibility for innovative medicines?
No, thanks. I think that's an important one. I think first and foremost, we just need to accept the fact that for sustained support to those markets, you also need to have profitability. But I think this is pretty much in the DNA of our company. And when Colonel Eli Lilly founded us back in 1876.
Pharmacist, by the way.
He was pharmacist and chemist, huh? Yes. And I think among the initiatives here, I think we, approximately 20 years ago, we founded the Lilly Care Foundation, and that is pretty much to help people in the US that are at a very low income to get access to advanced medicines. And currently, we have been helping more than 1 million people across the US to get access to innovative and patent-protected medicines. Outside of the US, we have an initiative that we are calling 30 by 30, and it's with the aim to help at least 30 million people in low, middle-income countries to access innovative Lilly medicines by 2030. And that's a combination of philanthropy and also value-based agreements with other stakeholders across the globe. So I think those are key initiatives on our side. Maybe just the last one I would refer to here in the US, the insulin pricing. I think that's something that has been debated for more than 15 years, but we were among the ones to take the initiative to the Part D pilot that started back in 2019, and the first company to announce that no one in the US, insured or uninsured, should pay more than $35 a month for their Lilly insulin. So I think it's an important part of our responsibility, and we are trying to lean in as strongly as we can in that space as well.
Great. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Again, I think if you've heard a great description of a private sector leader, I worry about the United States retreating from a global, not only responsibility, but a global collaboration. The idea that we would actually go ahead and pull out of the World Health Organization. I know that was also announced in Trump 1. It was not successfully executed. I'm afraid it has been announced at the very beginning, and it will be successfully executed, getting rid of the epidemiology division within the CDC, which is, again, not only deployed and training people all over the globe, but this very robust global health security partnership to try and identify and contain and control emerging diseases before they actually cross into our border, but also run clinical trials and be a very interactive agency. So I applaud the private sector moving in, but I hope you'll add your voice to those of us who are very alarmed that the public sector also has to be a real part of that and drive that initiative. And I know that there are, certainly some folks in the country who think all of the resources should be focused within the United States, but health is one of those areas where it, I think, can be quickly proven that soft diplomacy, health diplomacy, works a lot, keeps us more secure, keeps us more safe, and us retreating and leaving it to the private sector, I think, will be, again, a dangerous place for Americans to be.
Ned?
Just speaking about that, so the NIH and the NCI in particular spends a lot of money doing science in other countries, and has a big office of global oncology that now is run by Satish Gopal, a UNC alum, many of you know. And when I was taking over as NCI director, I had lunch with Harold Varmus, who had been prior NCI director before me. And Harold had started this office, and I said, Dr. Varmus, why does the NCI spend all this money in other countries doing science? And he said, because we have a moral obligation to cure cancer everywhere. And I said, that's great, Harold, but what am I going to tell Congress? Why is this? What's in it for the American taxpayer? Why should we be doing this? And I came to believe, and I certainly saw multiple examples of this. There really is something in it for us. It's not just being, a charitable philanthropic thing, but we really do benefit from doing research in other countries and facilitating clinical investigation in other countries. And I will give one example. The most important cancer prevention trial going on in the world right now is happening in Costa Rica, which is a trial of 1 versus 2 doses of the HPV vaccine to prevent cervical cancer, right? I mean, this would be a huge deal because, right now 2 shots is really hard to implement to the millions of women who will get cervical cancer without any sort of prophylaxis for that. So we don't know if 1 shot's going to work as well as 2. That's a trial you couldn't do in the United States for a variety of complicated reasons, but you could do in Costa Rica. So the NCI has been funding this for about 7 years, and it should read out any day now. And so these are the examples I would use is, we need to know if, checkpoint inhibitors work in Hodgkin's disease. We can't do that in the US, so we're going to do that in a low and middle income country in Africa. And they benefit and we benefit. It's a win-win for the American taxpayer. So I think that international research and global, science is a really valuable priority that we shouldn't lose sight of.
That's great. Ned, I'm going to stay with you. So you've pivoted to getting deeper into the investment space, into the capital space. So how is the venture capital space and the PE world impacting the direction of science?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be said it's a bad time to be raising money for your company. It's a bad time for biotech right now. In my sort of 25 years in this space, we all like to say, you sound very sort of mature as an entrepreneur if you say it's a cyclic industry, and then you say what number, downturn it is for you, 5, 7, whatever. And it is a cyclic industry, and, there are these punctuated bad periods and good periods. But what people hear when they hear, cyclic is like a sine wave, which is, half time up and half the time down. And that's not cyclic in this sense. This is like mostly bad. And then every once in a while, there are these brief 6-month windows when, biotech funding is really great. And we're not in one of those. We're actually at sort of maybe, I don't know, probably, since 2020, we're in 5th year of a really bad funding environment. But, I am confident this will come to an end at some point. There will be an upturn in biotech because the things that we're doing are so vital and important and so desirable. So I think that demand will come back at some point, but hard to predict when. I think the funding of the federal government for early stage biotech through like the SBIR program is really critical at this period. This is a time when many of these small companies are living by, federal funding for the moment, and hopefully that won't get screwed up as we've already talked about tonight. But I do think, brighter days are ahead inevitably because that's the way this industry works. And the last thing to say about that is there are some real pluses to starting a company in this kind of bad environment because although the venture funding may be hard to round up for your idea, there are a lot of great people available who can work on your idea. So we started UN Therapeutics in 2008, which was a worse time than now. So these people who tell me, oh, it's so bad to raise money, you should have been back then. We did, I'm not kidding, like 70 pitches to raise our first $1 million for that company or something. So venture funding is very hard to come by, but great people are available. And I've already said that's the most important thing. So I think that, it's a bad time, but it'll get better. And, the RTP economy is really very dependent on this. And so, stay tuned.
That's a great segue for you, Larry. Continuing talking about funding, Larry, you know the RTP as well as anybody and have practiced in this space for decades. So what's the outlook for investment capital in RTP, and what have you learned from your clients in the industry in general?
I'm an optimist, I think, and so I see that while we're down in funding right now, and it may be longer than any of us would like to. We've got extraordinary people here in the Triangle doing unbelievable things in the labs, and it's only a matter of time until we get that blockbuster novel observation that is going to knock us in the socks and get the financing open back up. I think if we look at some of the drivers for why we don't have financing right now, a lot of the financing for earlier stage companies starts at the top, what's happening in the public markets. And if we all remember the SPAC market took off in the early 2020s, many of the SPAC companies that were coupled with the big dollars were life science companies, sold off of hockey stick revenue forecast. And almost immediately after the transactions were closed and consummated, Many of them starting at $10, which is the per share price for all of the SPACs. They go to 50 cents. So at the top level, it doesn't really help if the public markets are not having successes. And on the technology side, we need some blockbusters. You have to have blockbusters, whether it's neural or oncology or wherever it is, and notwithstanding the success of the obesity drugs right now and how important they are, we just need a blockbuster. Somebody's got to come through with an area that's really hot, and venture capital is just like the people say, it's the herd mentality. If we get a blockbuster out there, people are going to follow. And right now, I don't know, I see with all due respect to my venture capital friends in the audience, I know there are entrepreneurs out there who are trying to raise money, and you've talked to many people that have seen your business plan. They like the management team, they like the product, they like the addressable size of the marketplace that your therapeutic is attacking. And they say, but today I'm focused on my companies, my portfolio companies. So I don't have the bandwidth to do the due diligence for your company. But as soon as you get a lead, let me know, and I'll be right there to write a check. Anybody heard that speech here recently? Well, it's part of that herd mentality. Once the speeches start, I'm willing to lead this investment, that's going to make a big difference in the investment community, in my opinion.
Great. Patrick, from a big pharma perspective, what are the challenges and opportunities of keeping the investment in the long term in R&D in the economic environment that we're in right now?
What we are facing right now, taking into account the most recent launches, is a really good time for the company. But we have declared publicly that we will continue to invest a huge chunk of our revenues into R&D. We have done close to 25% for many years now, and we announced close to 25% for 2024 as well. We have made it clear that we are not going to prioritize dividends or buybacks over investments in R&D. So that's going to be key. Of course, you want to make sure that you're investing in the right R&D as well. So I think we are fortunate enough to be engaged in many different disease areas, not just cardiometabolic health, but cancer, neuroscience with Alzheimer's disease and immunology. So I think it's probably more along the lines of the initiatives that I referred to earlier, the gateways, making sure that you're partnering with companies early on, and the global presence is going to be key here as well. We have been hosting innovation days outside of US, in Japan, for example, where we know that they have plenty of seeds, but they have a hard time to take them through the development plans that are needed to become medicines. So I think we will continue very much along those lines. And then, of course, a high degree of curiosity is going to be key. We are currently in 4 different disease areas, and we were not in all of those in the previous century. And there might be some new areas that we need to consider when we're moving into the next decade as well.
Okay, final question for you guys from us. We're going to ask the audience in a moment. So can each of you share one promising area of R&D in biopharma that we should be paying attention to over the next 10 to 20 years and why it excites you? Maybe we start with Secretary Sebelius.
Well, I will pitch the R&D that's going on in the company that's right here in the triangle, because it's pretty amazing. So there is some early, very exciting development on the possibility of being able to regenerate a new pancreas for diabetics, for type 1 and type 2 diabetics, and keep islets alive in a different kind of vessel where they grow and thrive and could be implanted and replace a failed pancreas, so you would actually cure diabetes. And the early stages are incredibly promising, and it looks like the future could really happen in a very exciting way.
If we're talking about 10 to 20 years, I think I'm super excited about what's going on in the area of genetic medicines. And we published a paper a year ago about 2 kids with genetic hearing loss, and they were treated, and they both recovered to pretty much a normal hearing. And I think that was just miraculous, and we are now running bigger trials here. But if that's what you can do with kids with genetic hearing loss, I think we can all imagine what's the art of the possible, and I think that would be game-changing for so many.
That's great. Larry?
I would agree. I think that I'm just in love with any of the CRISPR technologies these days and what they can do, not only for curing the disease, but in many respects, if I'm just treating a disease, I may not have such a great quality of life. And I may feel better and I may be doing okay, but if I can actually get a cure for my disease and get quality of life after I've been cured, that to me is something really important that we should be focused on.
I pick up on a lot of the same ones, and we've already talked a lot about AI. But since we're ostensibly a bunch of lawyers here, I will say a place where law is going to fix innovation, and that is two areas actually that are really important. So we heard the importance of small molecules mentioned, but there's actually a preference in the law right now against small molecules. It's bizarre; it makes no sense. But the Inflation Reduction Act actually makes you, if you're an early stage innovator, it wants you to make a biologic as opposed to a small molecule. It's a bad idea. Otherwise, I think that law has many good aspects, but it needs to get fixed. And several legislators in North Carolina are trying to do that. So there's the EPIC Act, which is the idea is to get parity between small molecules and biologics. That would be a good thing. It would reinvigorate an industry that has become less attractive because of this reason. But the other one that I've long thought is a great idea, and it works really well, are these ideas of bespoke medicines, these medicines that are like work just for you. We know how to make those. We can make vaccines that will work just for you for your cancer. We can make antisense oligonucleotides that will trash just the right transcript for you if you have some congenital disease. So there are lots and lots of problems we could fix today if we knew how to sort of regulate and design those things. And right now there's sort of a manufacturing, there are a whole bunch of commercial and regulatory problems around that, but I think they're all fixable. And I do believe that in our lifetime, we'll start talking about truly personalized therapy, not just precision, but like for you and you only.
So I'm going to cheat a bit, I think, because I mentioned two of them. First of all, I mentioned next-gen cell therapies. I'm really excited by those. I think if we can get off-the-shelf CAR Ts and really, hopefully cure more patients, I really think that's a huge benefit, a potential benefit in oncology. I mentioned AI. I think, well, the jury's out, but I'm pretty excited about it. And then I'm hoping that the Lillys of this world continue to innovate in Alzheimer's disease. And I'm hoping that for personal reasons for my own family. And so I hope that continues.
Great. Well, we've got a little bit of time for a couple of questions from the audience. So anybody with great ideas for questions for the panel? Yeah. Sophia.
Hello, my name is Sophia. Thank you guys all for coming and speaking to us, and thank you, John and Aaron, for hosting this. This is an amazing event. We talked a lot about, especially this last question, what are the emerging, up-and-coming areas, what's coming next? But as experts in the field, where do you guys see the gaps? Where do you see little innovation happening? And if you were to talk to a whole bunch of people who are excited to innovate in entrepreneurship, what would be your call to action of, we are not seeing innovation, we're not seeing experts, we're not seeing innovation in this area. We would love for people to go into this, and kind of that call to action for people in this room and even beyond here.
I think this is not a question of opinion. There's actually a right answer to this question. And the problem that I see that keeps me up at night, honestly, as an oncologist and a former federal official, is an antimicrobial resistance. There are a bunch of organisms that are going to kill us all that are just growing out there. They're festering in our microbiomes, and nobody's making the antibiotics to take these things on for a bunch of weird reasons that are interesting why this happens, but you just kind of can't make any money in antibiotics, I will paraphrase. So I am very worried about this problem. I worried about it at the FDA. I worried about the NIH. I worry about it as a citizen. And I think that, we need to figure out how to solve this problem. There is a law that has been proposed called the Pasteur Act that would have been a great idea if it hadn't been shot down, but hopefully that will get revived, and, we'll try and fix this, but there might be other solutions as well. But it is a real problem.
I think that's a huge problem, and it's a global huge problem. I would say in this country, we still have a real problem around a lot of women's health issues. In my observation, and I wasn't inside the FDA, but dealt a lot with the FDA, some divisions are going gangbusters and others don't go very quickly at all. The processes around cancer drug improvement have moved. They've got ways to speed it up. They've got ways to. The Women's Health Division, I would say, is back in the 1950s. And in part, it slows down at the regulatory level, but I think it also slows down in the big pharma level. I mean, there haven't been lots of innovations around what's going on with women's bodies, whether it's, menopause or birth control or a whole variety of issues that really affect people day in and day out. So that's one that comes up periodically as just we're still stuck in a different era. It hasn't been all that long ago that NIH had to be ordered to include women in clinical trials. And I'm serious. Congress had to pass a bill saying you've got to do this because, as one scientist told me, and this was well before my time, it was the 90s, but they did not have women in clinical trials. They were too messy. They were either premenopausal or postmenopausal or having a period or not having. It just got too complicated, so it was just easier to do breast cancer research on men. And there are some men who get breast cancer, let me make that very clear. But so I think there's a lot of areas in women's health that just have been overlooked for a very long time, and debilitating conditions that still don't have cures other than go get a hysterectomy or figure it out another way.
I agree with everything. I would just add mental health as well. I think that's an area where we saw a lot of progress during the 90s, but it has pretty much been stable since then. So I think still when we're looking into major depressive disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, and many others, very limited progress has been made over the last couple of decades, and there is a huge, huge unmet medical need.
So I'm Mark Pappas with Pappas Capital, and I appreciate all the comments that were made on the panel. It's very provocative in a variety of ways. But if I could pick up on the theme about China for a minute. I may be a bit long in the tooth in having worked in the international markets, but I'd remind my colleagues from Lilly and Glaxo and others the pirating days where we lost a lot of intellectual property on main products into these particular markets. So we have a fund that's investing in China. It's a US dollar fund that's investing in disruptive technologies in China and in the region. We put it on pause because of the geopolitical stuff. We also put it on pause because of the espionage that was occurring around intellectual property. I sit on a board of an NCI university, and thank goodness the FBI and CFIUS stepped in and found some of our scientists collaborating with some of the Chinese, causing problems around some pretty important intellectual property. So I'm kind of torn about what's happening in China. I'm very optimistic about what can happen in China. I'm scared to death about some of the intellectual property activities in China. I also, this is a personal belief, given the amount of in-country transfer price profits that are locked up in companies like Glaxo, Lilly, Novartis, AstraZeneca, where that money can't be expatriated. So therefore, there's a great opportunity there for the large pharma companies to begin doing primary research in country around things that will use that capital in a pretty interesting way. And I hope that trend does occur in some form. I know Lilly's doing some of that with their Lilly Ventures and with their operating company. I know Merck AG and Novartis are. But what's your concern about intellectual property in that region?
When I was at NCI, it became clear that a number of U.S. labs were lying to the federal government about their involvement with Chinese labs. And the way this would happen is when you file a grant filing to the National Cancer Institute, you have to disclose your percent effort and your funding sources for your research. And they typically would not mention that like half their salary came from some Chinese lab, or that they had 25 people working in Shanghai. And I got briefed by the FBI in skiffs, on this topic, and it is much worse than I think got out into the general news. And and then at one point, Francis Collins sent a letter to all 100 and every single grant recipient from the National Institutes of Health, saying you really have to stop this. This is a problem. You have to police your faculty. You have to disclose these entanglements honestly to the NIH if you're going to ask us for money. And my sense is it got better. I think that the academic institutions really took this very seriously and realized this could be a problem for them. I think there was also a tremendous concern that we would somehow alienate or a really great relationship. We got so many great scientists from China, so many postdocs and grad students coming from China, and no one, of course, wanted to stigmatize wonderful Chinese researchers in this country in any way. So it was a really difficult issue. But I have to say, I'm like you. I'm still a bit worried about it. It's worse than I think was advertised.
John, thank you. Question and comment on arts. Actually, I want to comment on arts. 20 years ago, when I was at Cerenix here in the park, we had an exact same Chinese espionage funded by the Chinese government through tentacles that you would not realize. So the espionage, and even at that time, FBI was involved, but we could not ever capture the person here locally. They just ran away. So the espionage issue is actually a big deal. And is it going on even today and actually transferring technology to China? I hope we can figure out how to stop that quite a bit. So we work with countries all around the world, and we separate technology so that there's no ability to file patents against your intellectual property that you're generating. So I just want to thank Art to mention that. Quite a bit going on for a long time. Case that's in the public domain. You can read it in the papers. Question that I wanted to ask, I'm a UNC startup company 6 years ago, small molecule company. Ned already mentioned the issue of IRA. We could not raise money for 2 years because of that. And then we partnered this year with Novo Nordisk on our lead program. But now it's very difficult to still go raise money. Because of the IRA, how would you advise companies to think about IRA, especially if you're a small molecule company?
Oh, no, it's you.
I will say it's, I've had this hilarious discussion where you go to like a venture capitalist, you say, I have this great target. I'm going to cure cancer by drugging this target. And they say, well, is it a small molecule or a biologic? And you're like, it's a small molecule. And you're like, well, could it be a biologic? It's like, that's not how science works, right? I mean, so this is a real problem, as I said, and it's very counterproductive because, as has been alluded to, biologics are complicated to administer. They have to be infused. They're difficult to manufacture. They're the drugs that go into shortage, these bad shortages we have. They're typically sterile injectables. And they're very difficult to genericize. So, there's this biosimilar pathway. It doesn't work nearly as well. So it's really in America's best interest to support small molecules. But and I've spoken to many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who supported the IRA and asked them why there's this weird preference, and nobody knows. No, or at least no one will admit to knowing. So there's this 9 to 13 thing. I don't know, but I do hope it will get fixed. And I think it will. I think there's bipartisan legislation being advanced now. It's one of the few bipartisan things that's happening, and so I think that the prospects of that. The orphan drug provisions are also problematic. If you have approval for a single orphan indication and you seek a second approval, you lose your non-negotiable status, and so that you're penalized under the law. So I think those two things, there's probably some momentum to fix. And lastly, I'll say, we're now 1 year into the first sort of sets of drug prices, for the IRA and starting the second round. And I think the results have not been as bad as imagined. I think no less than David Ricks might have said that it could have been worse, right? So I think the IRA was really scary in the beginning, but I think people are now becoming less worried about it. Although, still the details matter tremendously, and we'll see what happens.
So I think we're about at the end of our time. John and I just want to thank everybody for coming. First off, a round of applause for our great panelists. I knew I'd personally learn a lot today, and I had a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun for me. And thanks to John for partnering on this. Eshelman Innovations, they're doing great things, and John's become a really good friend, like I mentioned. So I appreciate everything that he's done to make this happen.
Yeah, ditto on all the thanks. It's been great to work with the School of Law. It's been an absolute delight. I wanted to add my thanks. Many of these folks I've on the panel here I've known for a long time. And the closing comment would be, in the audience here, we've got folks who are, like me, seasoned in the biopharmaceutical industry. Right, Art? We're seasoned, right? And we've got some folks setting out on their journey, some incredibly talented folks, students here at UNC that see a path forward in the industry, which has been, for many of us, has been a remarkable experience, life experience from a career perspective. So I hope for that group in particular, the young talent in the room that are looking at this industry, they get excited. Yeah, we've talked about a few challenges, but the reality is, this is a remarkable industry with remarkable opportunities from a career perspective. And I think if you were starting out on your career journey, you should absolutely look at this industry. It's a remarkable place to be. Thank you to everybody.
Thank y'all for coming.